The Cotswolds air was crisp with late spring. A gentle breeze rustled the banners at the annual county show, held on the sprawling green fields just south of Chipping Norton. Stalls lined the gravel walkways, scones, sheep shearing, vintage tractors, and hand-woven blankets, but the biggest crowd gathered around the main arena. There, standing tall under a velvet banner reading Ashdown Hall Presents, Champions of Tomorrow, was Lady Octavia Ashdown herself. Impeccably dressed in a navy blazer, cream riding pants, and a silk scarf knotted just so, Octavia raised a glass of sparkling elderflower press as she addressed the audience. This, she gestured with theatrical flair toward the restless black stallion inside the enclosure, is Ravenheart. Once a prize-winning prospect, now sadly untouchable. A tragic tale, but a lesson in humility, yes. The crowd murmured. A few tilted their phones to record. The horse's massive hooves stomped anxiously on the ground. His ears twitched, his eyes wild. And yet, Octavia continued, some believe even now he can be redeemed through softness. She almost laughed as she said it. Through gentle whispering and well-meaning intent. Isn't that right, Rupert? A wave of polished blonde hair moved beside her. Rupert Chalcot, Olympic-level show jumper, media darling, and Octavia's fiancé, stepped forward in tight breeches and a smug grin. I say this with all due respect, Rupert announced, voice projected with trained poise, but sometimes you can't outlove trauma. You've got to assert control. Otherwise, the beast wins. There was a ripple of polite chuckles. A few claps. A farmer in the back shouted, "Here, here." And then a deeper voice cut through the crowd. Calm. Controlled. Control isn't the same as healing. The crowd parted slightly as Aiden Rowe stepped forward. Dark-skinned, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a flat cap and boots dusty with real work, he walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had once worn ceremonial armor and patrolled the Queen's parade. Octavia raised a brow. Mr. Rowe? You're still offering your, how shall I put it, radical therapy. I offer what's proven, Aiden said, stepping closer to the arena, never breaking eye contact with Ravenheart. The horse flicked an ear toward him. Pain causes behavior. Understand the pain, change the behavior. Someone scoffed. Rupert crossed his arms. Ravenheart sent a junior rider to the hospital with 5 broken ribs. We're not talking about a therapy pony here. I know exactly what we're talking about, Aiden replied. I served with horses that danced in royal processions and froze under gunfire. I've worked with veterans and broken riders. None of them wanted pain. They wanted peace. So does he? The crowd quieted. Aiden walked up to the edge of the fence. Ravenheart tossed his head, snorted. But he didn't bolt. I'm asking, Aiden continued, to be allowed a formal evaluation. From the beginning. Full observation. Full transparency. Octavia's smile was sharp as glass. Interesting? And if we give you 2 weeks? Aiden frowned. That's not enough time for. No, she said sweetly. 2 weeks. 14 days. With one condition, she snapped her fingers. A young intern brought forward a leather folder. Rupert opened it and read aloud. If, within 14 days, an independent council confirms Ravenheart can be safely ridden at a basic level, Ashdown Hall will lease you the old stables for your community center. Gasps whispered through the audience. Aiden's eyes narrowed. And if I fail? Octavia's voice dropped, smooth as silk. You lose your access to our training tenders for 3 years. No bids. No referrals. No foot in the door. Your therapy dreams go elsewhere. There was silence. Even Ravenheart seemed to pause. Maya Rowe, watching from the crowd, mouthed, "Don't do it." But Aiden stepped forward and nodded. "Make the council truly independent, Dr. Desai. Mr. Llewellyn. And someone from the Equine Welfare Federation. I want it on paper." Rupert shrugged. "You'll still fail. But sure. Let's waste some parchment." Octavia's pen moved swiftly. "Done." The crowd erupted in chatter. Some clapped. Some shook their heads. One journalist from a local paper scribbled furiously. Somewhere, Ravenheart gave a low, tense whinny. Octavia leaned in just enough for Aiden to hear. "I'm giving you a stage, Mr. Rowe. Use it well. Or go quietly back to wherever you came from." Aiden didn't flinch. His eyes never left the stallion. "I never go quietly," he said. As the crowd dispersed, Rupert threw one last smirk over his shoulder. "Can't wait to see you talk that beast into a trot, mate." But Aiden had already tuned him out. His mind was racing, scanning every angle of the paddock, every twitch in Ravenheart's body, every ounce of pressure that had just landed on his shoulders. He'd been given 14 days to turn a monster into a mount. And he would start not with commands, but with silence. Ashdown Hall sat like a jewel in the late afternoon sun, its honey-colored stone glowing warmly, as if it didn't house ghosts of old power. Ivy crawled along its west wall, leading down to the ancient stables, once a training ground for fox hunters and prized racehorses, now mostly shuttered and forgotten. Aiden stood at the base of the staircase, his boots freshly scrubbed, his shirt collar sharp, his mind already in the ring. Inside the oak-paneled study, the contract waited on the polished mahogany desk like a trap. A man in a double-breasted suit stood beside it, Mr. Kendrick, Ashdown Hall's long-time estate solicitor. Grey-haired, smooth-voiced, he wore his authority like another layer of clothing. Lady Octavia sat behind the desk, as though it were a throne. Rupert leaned lazily against the fireplace, a crystal tumbler of scotch in hand. Aiden entered and nodded once, calm but unblinking. "Let's keep this brief," Octavia said. "The council will consist of Dr. Priya Desai, our on-call vet." "I requested her independently," Aiden interrupted. Yes, she waved a hand. "And Mr. Llewellyn, our stable master. And a representative from the Equine Welfare Federation," Aiden added firmly. Rupert gave a theatrical groan. "You really think bureaucracy's going to save your skin?" Aiden turned to Kendrick. "Is that clause included?" "It is," Kendrick replied, sliding the contract forward. "All conditions are binding. You'll have full access to Ravenheart and his enclosure, and your interactions will be monitored. In 14 days, the council will vote, majority rules. Success grants you a 10-year lease on the old stables. Failure disqualifies you from all Ashdown tenders for 3 years. Sounds generous, Octavia added. Given your, shall we say, unorthodox methods." Aiden picked up the pen. He paused. "I want the right to request private veterinary evaluation and daily logs. No surprise feed changes. No altered tack. And no unauthorized access to the stall." Rupert smirked. "Paranoid already?" "No," Aiden said, signing his name in a bold, practiced hand. "Experienced." The moment the ink dried, Octavia clapped once. "Splendid. You start tomorrow. But we've made one tiny adjustment." Rupert opened a leather folder and handed Aiden a printed schedule. "Public demonstrations. Almost every other day. Community interest," Octavia said sweetly. Ashdown Hall is proud to be transparent. You're stacking the calendar to give me no time, Aiden muttered. You're free to decline, she said. Of course, that would breach the contract. From the doorway, Mr. Llewellyn entered, his weathered face unreadable. You'll be staying in the groom's quarters beside the stable, he said. Fresh linens have been brought in. I'll walk you there. Aiden nodded curtly and followed the older man out. As they stepped into the fading light of the estate's southern courtyard, the grandness of the grounds gave way to the worn cobblestones and rusted hinges of the forgotten stable wing. Llewellyn opened the wooden door into a sparse room with a cot, a kettle, a metal sink, and nothing more. Better than the barracks? Llewellyn asked dryly. Cleaner, Aiden said. There was a moment of silence between them, broken only by the distant call of a bird over the tree line. Ravenheart. Llewellyn finally said, he wasn't always like this. Something happened in that stall a year ago. A commotion? The next day, the groom quit. Files vanished. I wasn't told the full story. Did you try to report it? I was reminded of my retirement package. Aiden looked him in the eye. I'll find out what happened. Llewellyn nodded once. Don't trust anyone in a navy blazer. Later that evening, Aiden stood in front of Ravenheart's stall. The horse didn't charge or rear, just stared, one ear flicked back. He was wary, but not vicious. Alert, but exhausted. Aiden leaned against the wall, deliberately not looking straight at him. He just listened, to the sound of hooves shifting straw, to the breath that trembled out of the animal's flared nostrils. He pulled a folded cloth from his pocket, and began wiping down the metal bars of the stall, not out of necessity, but ritual. Presence? In the army, he had stood watch in silence for hours, waiting for an enemy that never came. Here, the enemy was already inside, the trauma, the betrayal, the hidden pain no one had dared to name. He heard footsteps. Maya stood at the far end of the stable corridor, holding her phone. You really signed it? Every word, Aiden replied. She walked closer, her sneakers crunching the old straw. I ran a background check on Rupert, she whispered. Found an old incident at Cheltenham. A horse he was riding spooked mid-jump. Post-accident scans showed a cracked rib, on the horse. Vet recommended 3 months off. Rupert raced him 2 weeks later. Aiden's jaw clenched. He wins, she added, but it's always at a cost. They stood there for a moment, side by side. Ravenheart turned slightly, just enough to glance at them with one eye. I'll be here every night, Aiden said. Sleeping beside the stall. Are you trying to prove something to them, or to yourself? Maya asked. Neither, Aiden replied quietly. I'm trying to prove something to him. Behind them, Ravenheart exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding his breath for a year. The night deepened, shadows stretching long against the stone walls of Ashdown. Somewhere upstairs, laughter drifted from the main house. The elite dined on roast lamb and local wine. But down in the stable wing, a soldier laid his coat across a cot, a horse watched from the shadows, and the first hour of healing began in utter silence. The morning fog settled over Ashdown like a gauze curtain, softening the edges of the hedgerows and turning the stables into quiet silhouettes. Aiden Rowe sat on a folding stool just outside Ravenheart's stall, wrapped in a wool blanket, a notebook in his lap. He'd been there since before sunrise, unmoving, breathing in rhythm with the world around him. Inside the stall, Ravenheart stood with his body pressed to the back wall, still and suspicious. Every few minutes, his ears flicked back toward Aiden. They were locked in a quiet standoff, not of wills, but of patience. Aiden didn't speak. He didn't coax. He didn't reach through the bars. He just existed. On the first day, he didn't even touch the stall door. Instead, he wrote in slow, deliberate strokes. Day 1, 6:03, horse remains on high alert. Breathing shallow. Eyes show whites. No signs of aggression, only hypervigilance. Avoids eye contact. Refuses food unless left alone. No vocalization. He glanced up to see Ravenheart watching him now, barely, just a flicker of acknowledgement before the stallion turned his head again. That was progress. By midday, Aiden introduced the towel. A simple hand towel, rolled and tied in the middle with twine. He dipped it in warm water infused with lavender and chamomile and draped it over the edge of the stall door, just enough for Ravenheart to see. He didn't say a word. Didn't move it. Just let it hang there? The horse snorted once, backed a step, then resumed watching. Later that afternoon, Aiden tried the clicker. He clipped the device to his belt and began the tiniest exercises: click, wait, place a small treat just inside the stall, well within Ravenheart's sight but out of reach unless the horse stepped closer. He didn't. Not at first. But by nightfall, the treat was gone. Aiden smiled and made no comment. Instead, he folded his blanket, refilled the water buckets, and laid down beside the stall gate. As he drifted into sleep, he heard the faintest sound, hooves stepping gently across straw. Ravenheart was approaching the door. On the second morning, Aiden didn't use the towel. He used his hand. He didn't push it into the stall. He just rested it on the gate, palm facing down, fingers loose. Then he waited. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Ravenheart stepped forward, then froze. Aiden didn't move. Then slowly, like a breath caught in time, the horse leaned forward and sniffed his hand. Click. Treat placed. No words spoken. Aiden didn't smile. He didn't react. He just waited again. From behind him, a quiet voice spoke. "You always this slow with progress." It was Priya Desai, her dark hair pulled into a low bun, clipboard tucked under one arm. She stood in the stable hallway with her vet bag and a look of mild curiosity. "I'm not here to tame him," Aiden said without turning. "I'm here to let him decide if he wants to trust me." She stepped forward. "May I?" Aiden nodded. Priya walked quietly toward the stall, keeping her posture low and sideways, not directly facing the horse. She didn't speak, just watched. "He's been avoiding touch on the left flank," Aiden murmured. "And there's a scar under the withers. Looks old, but it's puckered." Priya squinted, then nodded. "I'll need to run a scope. But you're right. That scarring wasn't in the last vet report." Aiden raised an eyebrow. "There's a lot not in the reports." Priya crouched beside the gate. "You ever consider he's not just scared of pain, but expecting it?" Aiden nodded. "Every second." That night, Maya sent him a photo. An old promotional image from 2 years ago, Ravenheart as a 2-year-old, standing proud, saddle glinting in the sunlight. But what caught Aiden's eye wasn't the posture or the tack. It was the saddle pad, custom embroidered with the Ashdown crest, but visibly misaligned. A bulge near the left stirrup strap. That could have created pressure right over the shoulder joint. He zoomed in. His stomach turned. That wasn't just uncomfortable. That was enough to cause trauma. He texted Maya. "That pad, can you trace the supplier? I need a name." I think this was sabotage. At midnight, Aiden was still awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor outside the stall. Ravenheart now stood only a foot away, body relaxed, tail still. His massive head lowered slowly. Then stopped inches from Aiden's shoulder. Then gently, soft as breath, he lowered his head against Aiden's side. Aiden froze. The weight was heavy. Warm. A silent offering of trust. A second passed. Then another. Aiden reached up slowly, placed a hand on the stallion's forehead, and whispered, "That's it. I've got you." The next morning, Rupert arrived. He strode into the stable aisle with loud boots and louder perfume. His voice bounced off the stone walls. "Well, well. Isn't this cozy?" Ravenheart immediately backed away, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. Aiden stood and positioned himself between the stall and Rupert. "You're not on the clearance list." "I came to see the miracle worker," Rupert said, arms crossed. "Heard rumors that the beast actually let you touch him." "Maybe he's just tired of being screamed at," Aiden said coolly. Rupert's eyes narrowed. "Or maybe you've got something else in that pouch of yours. Bit of calming powder. Injection. I've seen it done." Aiden didn't flinch. "Say that again. Louder. So the camera catches it." He gestured to the new CCTV device mounted above the stall. Rupert smiled thinly. "No need for drama. Just a friendly check-in." He turned and walked away, but not before muttering loud enough for Aiden to hear. "He'll bolt when it counts." Aiden said nothing. But behind him, Ravenheart exhaled deeply, then stepped forward again, as if to prove the man wrong. The fourth morning dawned colder than expected, bringing with it a sharp wind that whistled through the narrow gaps in the old stable doors. Aiden had already cleaned out Ravenheart's stall, reset the water buckets, and laid out a new saddle pad, not to ride, just to let the horse inspect it. Every motion was slow, rehearsed, intentional. It had taken days to earn this much progress. He wouldn't risk losing it over a moment of ego. Priya Desai arrived just after 7 a.m., her veterinary van parked in the gravel drive beside the stables. She stepped out carrying 2 black cases and a rolled-up, portable examination mat. "He let you touch the flank yet?" she asked, setting her gear down beside the stall. Aiden shook his head. "He allows proximity. Sometimes brushes against me. But no direct pressure to the left shoulder. He flinches before I even reach. Then we go gentle," she said. Within 30 minutes, the exam area had been set. Priya laid soft rubber mats just outside the stall, dimmed the overhead light, and placed a calming diffuser in the corner. Aiden led Ravenheart out using only a soft halter and a long lead, speaking low and rhythmic with every step. "Good," Priya whispered as the horse stepped onto the mat. "Just hold him steady. Let me do the talking." She began with a basic touch evaluation, fingertips grazing the barrel, sliding down the legs, circling around the flank. At the left shoulder, Ravenheart stiffened, snorted, but didn't rear. Aiden steadied his breathing, silently anchoring the horse with his own calm. Then Priya moved to the scope. She gently slid the endoscope along the stallion's mouth, checking for ulcer signs. A monitor beside them flickered to life, showing inflamed tissue, reddened lining, and several clear signs of gastric stress. "There," she said softly. "Gastric ulcers. Bad ones. Possibly stress-induced. That explains the biting and irritability." "And the shoulder?" Aiden asked. Priya crouched lower, running her fingers along the muscle fiber at the scapula. "Heat and inflammation. And here, see this?" She pointed to a tight knot beneath the skin. "That's chronic. Could be from ill-fitting tack or repeated strain. I'll need imaging to confirm, but the muscle's compressed." Aiden's jaw tightened. "And no one caught this?" They caught it, she muttered. But someone overruled the rest. She pulled out her tablet and opened a previous scan, dated 6 months ago, clearly marked with a red recommendation, rest for 8 to 12 weeks. No riding. Adjust saddle or discontinue use entirely. Underneath, the signature that overruled the recommendation was unmistakable. Rupert Chalcot. Aiden stared at the screen. Priya looked up at him. He pushed to keep Ravenheart on the roster. Big donor event that month. If the horse didn't show, Ashdown would have lost the grant. Aiden shook his head slowly. He made him perform through injury. And pain, Priya added. This wasn't behavioural. It was survival. This horse was screaming for help and no one listened. The room went quiet. Ravenheart exhaled, tail flicking gently. Aiden knelt beside the stallion and rested a hand just above the injury site. He didn't press, just hovered, letting the warmth of his palm bridge the distance. "I'm listening now," he whispered. Later that afternoon, Aiden revised the treatment plan. He swapped the grain-heavy diet for a mix designed for ulcer recovery, rich in forage and probiotics. He replaced the salt blocks with magnesium-enriched options. Every hour, he returned to check on Ravenheart, not to work, but to simply exist beside him, reading from a book, listening to ambient music, or just breathing. He also began desensitization therapy. No direct contact. Just placing the saddle pad inside the stall at a distance. Then closer. Then hanging it gently on the gate. Eventually, Ravenheart sniffed it, nudged it once, then left it alone. Day by day, Aiden murmured. Not by force. By evening, Maya arrived with a folder in hand. "You're not going to like this." She handed him an internal memo she'd pulled through one of her sources, an email thread between Rupert and Octavia, dated just before Ravenheart's last public appearance. "Rupert, he's not fit, but if he doesn't show, we lose the funding. I'll ride light and keep it quick. Octavia, do what you must. But if this leaks, it's your head, not mine." Aiden's hands curled into fists. "They knew," he said. "They knew and they sent him out anyway." Maya nodded. "And now they want you to fail so they don't have to explain what happened to the last rider. The accident wasn't Ravenheart's fault. He was in agony." "I'll need a signed vet record from Priya," Aiden said. "Document everything. You're going to push this legal?" Maya asked. "I'm going to push this truthful," Aiden replied. That night, Aiden didn't sleep in the groom's quarters. He stayed beside the stall, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, body curled near the gate. Ravenheart lay down for the first time since Aiden arrived, legs folded beneath him, head low, eyes half closed. It was a sign of trust, of safety. Horses don't sleep deeply unless they feel protected. In the moonlight, the old stable didn't feel forgotten anymore. It felt like a sanctuary. By the morning of the 5th day, word had already begun to spread around Ashdown. Not from press releases. Not from official reports. From whispers. "He let Rowe touch him," someone said near the tack room. "He stood still for the saddle blanket," another muttered behind the hay shed. "Must be some kind of drug involved. That horse isn't right." Aiden heard none of it directly. But he could feel it, like static in the air, an invisible resistance gathering weight. He didn't care. That morning, Ravenheart allowed him to lift the saddle pad and place it gently across his back. It was a slow ritual. Aiden didn't secure the girth or tighten the straps. He simply laid it on, watched Ravenheart's ears, waited for the twitch of discomfort that never came, then slowly removed it, treating the entire process as sacred. No sudden movements. No commands? No force? Just permission. Priya visited again before noon, this time with a physical therapist from the Equine Welfare Federation in tow. A tall woman named Dr. Valerie Meeks observed quietly as Aiden led Ravenheart in a slow walking circle outside the stable, the halter loose in his hands, no tension in the rope. "He's sound at the walk," Meeks noted. "Left shoulder still tight, but range of motion is improving." Priya added, "And the ulcers are already responding to the new diet. He's eating better. Drinking more. Sleeping better," Aiden said. "He laid down last night. First time since I've been here." Valerie smiled. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Aiden didn't smile back. His mind was already scanning ahead, next steps, potential setbacks, pressure points. He knew the real test wasn't physical. It was political. Later that day, just after feeding time, Maya arrived with a sour expression and her phone held out in front of her. "Look what someone forwarded anonymously," she said, pressing play on a voice recording. A woman's voice, posh, smooth, unmistakably Ashdown staff. "I don't care what that man says, there's no way that beast behaves like that without a little something in his feed. You know what they do, liquid sedatives, injections just below the flank. I've seen it before. That's why he's sleeping. That's why he's calm." Aiden's stomach turned. Maya scrolled down and showed him the transcript of a message sent to her PR inbox. No name? No sender ID. Just a quote. "Funny no one talks about who really used sedatives. Ever check the feed logs from 6 months ago?" Aiden leaned against the stable wall, processing. "They're trying to smear me before the test even happens." "They know you're winning," Maya said. "But if I come at them now," Aiden muttered, "it looks defensive. Desperate." "Not if we get ahead of it," she said. "Let me handle the messaging. I'll frame it as transparency. You keep doing what you do best." That evening, Mr. Llewellyn walked into the stable holding an old brown folder. He looked around before handing it over. "Found this behind a false panel in the records room," he said. "They thought it was destroyed." Aiden flipped it open. Vet reports. Feed schedules. Training logs. But the one page that made his blood run cold was a ledger entry marked 803, sedative compound added to feed, per RC approval. He read it twice. "You're telling me Rupert drugged him before shows?" Aiden said. "Just enough to take the edge off," Llewellyn replied. "Not enough to trigger a full test. But it made Ravenheart unpredictable. Numb in the ring, explosive outside it. No wonder he crashed." Aiden tucked the folder into his bag. "I'm holding this for the council." The next day, the gossip thickened. Rupert swaggered into the public stables during an open tour session, his timing deliberate. Tourists, photographers, and 3 local reporters wandered the area, following estate guides who whispered about Ashdown's rehabilitation experiment. Aiden was walking Ravenheart in the arena at the time, using only his voice and body cues. The horse responded to a half-turn, then a slow backstep. No bridle. No reins. Rupert clapped mockingly from the gate. "Well, look at that," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Maybe you should enter Britain's Got Talent." A few people chuckled nervously. Aiden ignored him. He kept his focus on the horse. Ravenheart flicked an ear, then continued stepping calmly in the circle. Rupert kept going. "Tell me, Aiden. What brand of magic potion is that? Or did you just bore him into submission?" One of the reporters raised her phone to record. Aiden stopped and faced the crowd. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't point fingers. Instead, he said, "You're looking at the result of trust, not chemicals. Of patience, not pain. Anyone who thinks the only way to train a horse is with force, should take a good hard look at why they're afraid of connection." The crowd went quiet. Rupert scowled and turned away. That night, as Aiden removed Ravenheart's halter and fed him his evening mash, the horse nudged him lightly in the chest. Not a shove? A touch. Aiden chuckled under his breath. "You're telling me we're not done yet, huh?" He sat down in the straw, leaning against the wooden beam while the horse ate. "I hear what they say," he whispered. "But I also see what you do. And that's louder." Outside the stable, the wind picked up. A storm was coming. But Aiden didn't flinch. He'd walked into worse. And this time, he wasn't walking alone. The sixth night began like the ones before, quiet, measured, ritualistic. Aiden brushed Ravenheart gently, using long, sweeping strokes with a soft bristled curry comb. The horse stood still, breathing evenly, occasionally shifting weight but never pulling away. The therapy pad had stayed on for nearly 5 minutes today without a single flinch. Aiden made a mental note, then scratched Ravenheart behind the ear where he liked it best. It felt like progress. Too much progress. Maya had said something earlier that kept repeating in Aiden's head like a siren underwater. They can't let you win this. At 11:04 p.m., Aiden locked the feed room, double-checked Ravenheart's stall gate, and returned to his cot just beside the main stable door. He'd gotten used to the sounds of the night, the creak of old wood, the sigh of the horse lying down, the distant hoot of owls. He could fall asleep to it now. Trusted it. Which is why, when the sharp crack of splintering wood shattered the silence, Aiden was on his feet in seconds. He grabbed his flashlight and sprinted down the aisle toward the commotion. Ravenheart's stall door stood wide open. The top bolt had been forced, the hinge cracked at the seam. Splinters littered the straw. The horse was gone. Ravenheart. Outside, hooves thundered across the gravel. Aiden bolted through the barn doors into the darkness. The moon was barely visible through the heavy clouds, but he could make out the glint of movement, Ravenheart galloping loose across the paddock, heading dangerously close to the south fence line. Aiden didn't shout. He didn't chase. He stood still in the field, and did the one thing no one else on this estate would have done. He breathed. "Stop," he whispered, more to himself than to the horse. "Breathe. So he can hear you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the small clicker, and tapped it once. The sound was tiny, but it cut through the night like a bell. Ravenheart skidded, veering sharply left. He trotted in a wide arc, still spooked, tail flared, muscles coiled. But he didn't run into the woods. He didn't crash through the fence. He circled back. Slowly. Cautiously. Aiden dropped to one knee and exhaled through his nose, shoulders relaxed, palms open. Ravenheart stopped 15 feet away, panting. Aiden clicked again. Then reached into his coat and pulled out a chunk of apple. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "I'm right here." For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then Ravenheart took one step. Then another. Then walked straight up to Aiden and lowered his head into the man's hands. Aiden pressed his forehead to the horse's and closed his eyes. "That's it. I've got you." He led Ravenheart back through the open gate, guiding him gently by nothing more than a hand on his neck. The stall was still open, the damage clearer now in the beam of his flashlight. Someone had used force, likely a pry tool, right at the weak point in the lock. But that wasn't what chilled him. It was the camera. The security camera of the stall had been covered, taped over crudely with black duct tape. Whoever had done this didn't want to be seen. Llewellyn arrived 10 minutes later, still in his bathrobe and boots, his hair mussed from sleep. "What the hell happened?" he asked. "Gate was forced," Aiden said. "Cameras blind. Someone knew what they were doing." Llewellyn's face hardened. "Let me check the grounds." He turned to leave, then paused. "There's a keypad lock on the western tack room. Access cards are coded. Only a few staff use that entrance after hours." He didn't have to say it. Aiden nodded. "Rupert." By the time the sun rose, the lock had been repaired, the camera reset, and Ravenheart fed and resting again. His body was calm. He hadn't injured himself. No cuts. No bruises. But the trust, they'd come too close to losing that. Aiden stepped into the office by the feed room, where the security system's log was stored. It wasn't connected to Wi-Fi, Ashdown's idea of tradition, but each swipe card left a timestamp. He scrolled through the log. 2:14 AM, access granted, West Tack Room, card ID number 7. He stared at it. Then Llewellyn walked in, holding a plastic tag between his fingers. "Found this near the edge of the paddock," he said. It was a small, black fob, mud-streaked but intact. Llewellyn held it out. "Guess what number's on the back?" Aiden turned it over. "Number 7. He exhaled slowly, fury building beneath the surface like steam behind steel. "You think Octavia knows?" Aiden asked. "She'll deny it," Llewellyn replied. "But she knows what Rupert is." Aiden pocketed the fob. "I'll take this straight to the council." That afternoon, during the scheduled observation session, Dr. Valerie Meeks stood at the edge of the arena with arms crossed as Aiden led Ravenheart in a slow figure 8. The stallion moved with more confidence now, still cautious, but responding to voice, breath, body cues. When Aiden stopped walking, Ravenheart stopped too. When he turned left, the horse followed. Valerie scribbled notes. Improved gait. Reduced signs of defensive behavior. Still wary, but responsive. Octavia watched from the viewing deck above the arena, her expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Rupert wasn't present. Not that day. Back in the stable, Aiden knelt beside Ravenheart, resting his hands on the horse's front legs, inspecting each hoof. "You came back," he whispered. "Even when they opened the gate, you chose to come back." Ravenheart bent his neck and nudged Aiden's shoulder. "Not because he had to. Because he wanted to." Aiden closed his eyes. It wasn't just trust anymore. It was a bond forged under fire. And someone upstairs had just realized that bond might be unbreakable. A thin veil of mist still clung to the paddocks as the council assembled by the arena. It was the 8th day of the contract, marking the midpoint, and the first official assessment of Ravenheart's progress. A public one. Ashdown Hall had made sure of that. Rows of white folding chairs had been arranged neatly along the arena fence. Octavia stood off to the side in a tailored grey coat, sipping black tea from a porcelain cup as though attending a garden party. Rupert was notably absent, though a few of his favoured stable hands lingered nearby, watching with clipped expressions and crossed arms. At the far end of the arena, the independent evaluation panel took their places, Dr. Priya Desai, quiet and composed, standing beside Mr. Llewellyn, who wore his flat cap low over his brow, and Dr. Valerie Meeks, the welfare representative, clipboard in hand and eyes already narrowed with scrutiny. Aiden stood just outside the arena gate, brushing dust off his plain black riding vest. He hadn't slept much the night before. Not after reviewing the footage of the sabotage. Not after printing the keycard log and placing it in a sealed envelope, ready for the council's review later. But this morning wasn't about vengeance. It was about Ravenheart. The stallion stood behind him, calm, fully tacked with a modified therapy saddle, no harsh bit, no rigid girth straps. Just light, breathable leather and soft padding, designed not to restrict but to support. "Ready," Aiden whispered, stroking the horse's neck. Ravenheart flicked his ear, shifted his weight forward. They walked into the arena together, no resistance, no hesitation. A quiet fell over the crowd. Aiden stopped in the center, turned, and nodded to Valerie. "We'll demonstrate walking, halting, light trotting," he announced. "No force aids, no rein pressure. Just breath, weight shifts, and voice." Valerie returned the nod. "Begin when ready." Aiden placed one hand lightly on the saddle and gave a small exhale through his nose, his cue to walk. Ravenheart stepped forward, smooth, steady. They made a slow, controlled circle around the arena. No pulling. No flinching. He halted with just a whisper of pressure in the seat. The horse obeyed immediately. Scattered applause rose from the far end of the arena. Then, Aiden guided him into a slow trot. Ravenheart responded, muscles flexing fluidly beneath him. 2 circuits later, Aiden gave a cue to halt again. That was when it happened. Ravenheart took one more step, then suddenly jerked his head, let out a sharp grunt, and staggered slightly to the left. His entire body tensed. The trot broke. The stallion planted his hooves, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. A ripple of murmurs broke through the audience. Aiden slid off the saddle immediately, landing softly in the dirt. He moved to Ravenheart's side, eyes tanning. The horse was holding weight off his left foreleg. Pain. Fresh, sharp, unexpected. Aiden raised his hand. "We're stopping the evaluation." Octavia stepped forward from the viewing deck, her voice slicing through the noise. "You're quitting now. Just when things get uncomfortable." "This isn't about comfort," Aiden said, not looking at her. "This is about welfare." Valerie approached. "Can you identify the issue?" Aiden pointed to the leg. "Left hoof. Something triggered sharp pain? Might be soft tissue, might be an object. I want a farrier on site immediately." "Already on his way," Priya confirmed, pulling out her phone. Octavia descended the steps quickly, her voice rising. "You're wasting the council's time. This is theatrics." "No," Llewellyn snapped, his voice firmer than anyone had heard in days. "This is professionalism. You want drama? Go upstairs. We're handling a horse." The crowd went silent. Minutes later, the farrier, a wiry man named Ben, arrived with his tools. He crouched beside Ravenheart, ran fingers gently along the hoof wall, then froze. "Found it," he muttered. "Tiny puncture, almost invisible. There's something lodged in here." He pulled out a delicate probe and began extracting. Aiden crouched beside him, heart pounding. Ben turned the tool, and slowly pulled free a small shard of rusted metal, barely the size of a dime. Gasps echoed through the arena. "This was embedded just deep enough to cause intermittent pain," Ben said. "Could have shifted just now under pressure. Would explain sudden lameness." Aiden stood and faced the council. That shard was why he collapsed before. Why he panicked. He wasn't misbehaving, he was in agony. Valerie nodded slowly, lips pursed. "This proves his behavior was pain-based. And your decision to stop the assessment prioritizes welfare." Octavia didn't move. Her face was unreadable. Aiden walked toward her and extended the sealed envelope. In here are the security logs from the night of the stall break-in. Swipe record. Access card ID. And video footage showing the sabotage. I'm submitting it to the council as evidence. She didn't take it. So Aiden handed it to Valerie instead. I'm not here to expose anyone, he said. But I won't let them hurt him again. Rupert arrived 10 minutes too late, sauntering into the arena like nothing had happened, wearing his signature smirk and a pair of sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Did I miss the magic show? He asked. You missed the reckoning, Llewellyn muttered. The council adjourned for the day with Ravenheart returned safely to the stables, his hoof treated and wrapped. Aiden stayed with him the entire afternoon, applying ice packs, checking his breath, monitoring his pulse. The bond was still there. Ravenheart leaned into him as he adjusted the wraps, breathing slow and even. You're a damn miracle, Aiden whispered. And they're terrified of that. Later that night, Priya sat beside him on the hay bale outside the stall. You know this just brought you enemies upstairs, she said. I didn't come to make friends, Aiden replied. She sipped from her thermos. You came to heal a horse. And you're doing it. Outside, the moon finally broke through the cloud cover. Inside the stall, Ravenheart lowered himself into the straw and closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, Aiden allowed himself to do the same. The next morning, the mood at Ashdown Hall was different. Colder. Tense. Despite the cloudless sky and bird song drifting through the trees, an invisible weight pressed down over the estate like fog made of silence. Doors stayed closed. Staff avoided eye contact. Whispers lingered in corridors but never became full conversations. Aiden had known something would happen after yesterday's evaluation. He just hadn't expected it so fast. At 9:17 a.m., a folded memo arrived, delivered by one of Octavia's assistants in a pressed blazer and tight smile. Due to unforeseen safety concerns, it read, the final council assessment has been cancelled, effective immediately. The 14-day contract remains in force, but no further evaluations will be scheduled. Best regards, Octavia Ashdown. Aiden stared at the page, jaw clenched. She's pulling the plug, he said aloud, holding it up for Priya and Maya to see. Trying to run out the clock. Maya snatched the paper and read it twice. If there's no final evaluation, the council can't vote. She wants a quiet disqualification, Priya said. Not a failure. Not a fight. Just silence. She's protecting Rupert, Aiden muttered. Again. She's protecting herself, Maya replied. They can't afford the truth coming out. Aiden turned toward the stable door. Ravenheart was standing in the paddock, hoof wrapped, eyes alert, ears turned toward the wind. Healing. A symbol of everything they'd worked for. Everything they were about to lose. No, Aiden said. Not like this. 2 hours later, they held a press conference in the village green. It wasn't glamorous, just folding chairs, a portable PA system, and a crowd of about 30 locals, mostly farmers, shop owners, and a few riders who'd followed the story online. But Maya had worked her connections. And more importantly, they had the evidence. Maya opened with a brief statement. My name is Maya Rowe, and I work in non-profit public relations. I'm also the sister of Aiden Rowe, who's currently under a 14-day contract at Ashdown Hall to rehabilitate a horse many deemed beyond saving. What began as a challenge of training has revealed something far deeper, patterns of negligence, of pressure, and of silence. She laid out the timeline, clear, factual, restrained. Then she showed the swipe log. The keycard number. The camera footage with the blacked-out lens. She displayed the vet recommendations that had been overruled, including the signature of Rupert Chalcot. She revealed the training logs that had vanished and resurfaced. Priya stepped forward next and explained the clinical side. Ravenheart's behavioural issues were never about attitude. They were about pain. Ulcers. Chronic shoulder compression. And finally, a puncture wound that caused unpredictable bursts of agony. These weren't training problems. They were medical problems ignored or suppressed. A journalist raised his hand. Do you believe Ashdown Hall was complicit in the cover-up? I believe someone there prioritized performance and prestige over the horse's well-being, Priya replied. And the moment that horse broke down, they blamed him instead of asking why. Another reporter asked Aiden, "What's your goal now that the final evaluation's been cancelled?" Aiden stepped forward, his voice steady. "My goal is what it's always been, to help the horse heal. And now, to make sure no one else has to suffer because of someone else's ambition. If Ashdown won't honor their contract, the public will know. The council will know. The sponsors will know." Maya ended the conference with one final punch. The Duchess of Wexley is the co-owner of the Ashdown Trust. She believed in the mission of using this land for good. And she deserves to know what's being done in her name. That night, the estate was quiet again. Until a black sedan rolled up the main drive. Lady Octavia looked out the window from her office and went pale. Out stepped the Duchess, elegant, formidable, and dressed in a deep navy coat with a single silver pin shaped like a horse's head. She didn't knock. She walked straight through the front entrance, flanked by two senior advisors, and made her way to the West Wing where Octavia was waiting. "I watched the press conference," the Duchess said coldly. "All of it." Octavia rose, trying to maintain her composure. It was a dramatic display, one-sided. "Don't," the Duchess snapped. "Don't insult my intelligence. I read the contract. I read the vet reports. I saw your fiancé's signature on the override. And now I've seen you try to silence the process entirely." Octavia's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "I was acting in the best interest of the estate," she said finally. "Then you've failed," the Duchess said. "Because the best interest of this estate is integrity." There was a long pause. Then the Duchess turned to her advisor. "Have the council reinstated. Schedule the final evaluation. Publicly. If it confirms the horse can be safely ridden, the Ashdown lease is to be granted to Mr. Rowe immediately. And Rupert Chalcot is to be disassociated from all future events." "You can't," Octavia began. "I can," the Duchess said, "and I just did." The next morning, Aiden received the call. He stepped out of the stable, phone to his ear, barely breathing. "Say that again," he whispered. Maya, on the other end, was crying and laughing at once. She overruled Octavia. The Duchess. "She's making them finish the contract. You have one more evaluation. Final, official. Tomorrow." Aiden looked out across the paddocks. Ravenheart stood just at the edge of the field, the wind blowing through his mane. The morning sun lit his coat like polished obsidian. The stallion turned his head and looked back. And for the first time since arriving at Ashdown Hall. Aiden smiled. Ashdown Hall buzzed with something it hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. The arena was packed, not with polite guests sipping champagne as Octavia might have preferred, but with riders, stable hands, local journalists, and townsfolk who had watched the drama unfold from their living rooms and hay barns. Kids leaned on the fence rails, old horsemen stood with arms crossed, and somewhere near the back, a riding school teacher whispered to her group of wide-eyed students, "Watch this." This is history. Aiden stood beside Ravenheart near the far end of the ring. The arena had been prepped meticulously. No sharp gravel. No unfamiliar scents. Every inch had been checked twice. Priya and Dr. Valerie Meeks stood in the evaluation booth, flanked by Mr. Llewellyn, who held his clipboard like a general going into battle. And at the top of the arena platform, standing tall in a long navy coat, was the Duchess of Wexley herself. She hadn't said much since she arrived, but her presence said everything. Aiden took one last deep breath. He adjusted the custom therapy saddle one final time, his fingers moving with care, checking every strap, every buckle, every pressure point. No bridle. No bit. Just a soft hackamore, designed for communication, not control. He stepped back. Ravenheart stood tall, motionless, his black coat gleaming in the sunlight. He looked out over the arena and gave a low breath that rolled across the crowd like distant thunder. Then he turned his head and looked at Aiden. That was the cue. Aiden walked to his side, placed a hand gently on his withers, and whispered, "Your pace, not mine." He mounted in one smooth motion, no stirrups, no yanking, no commands. Ravenheart didn't flinch. He stepped forward. The arena fell utterly silent. One step. Two. Then a walk. Slow. Controlled. Forward. Aiden shifted his weight subtly, barely perceptible. Ravenheart responded, a gentle turn left, then right. Then a halt. The stillness was absolute. Then Aiden inhaled deeply, centered his breath, and made the softest motion with his hips, and Ravenheart transitioned to a trot. The crowd gasped. It wasn't just the fact that the horse moved. It was how he moved. Balanced. Fluid. In sync with the rider. No tension. No resistance. No fear. When Aiden exhaled sharply through his nose, Ravenheart shifted down again, halting softly as if the thought to stop had been shared, not demanded. Then came the final cue. Aiden leaned slightly forward, exhaled again, and did nothing else. And Ravenheart began to canter. A slow, even rhythm, hooves drumming against the earth in a dance that was more poetry than performance. And then? He galloped. Not wild. Not reckless. Powerful. Free. Joyful. Aiden didn't hold him back. He didn't need to. And as the horse reached the far edge of the arena, Aiden made one final movement, a soft inhale and an almost imperceptible shift of weight. And Ravenheart slowed. Trotted. Walked. Stopped. Then turned. And walked right back to Aiden's original starting point, where the session had begun. The moment his hooves stilled, the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. But Ravenheart didn't look at them. He turned his head toward Aiden, leaned forward, and gently pressed his forehead against Aiden's chest. A hush fell over the arena. It lasted only a second, but it was louder than any applause. Mr. Llewellyn wiped a tear from under his cap. He's chosen his person. Dr. Meeks stepped forward and raised her clipboard. The council officially recognizes the horse as safe to ride at basic and intermediate levels. Criteria passed. Council votes unanimous. Priya handed the microphone to the Duchess, who stepped forward with calm authority. Effective immediately, Ashdown Hall will enter a long-term lease agreement with Mr. Aiden Rowe, she announced, her voice clear. The old stable wing will become the home of the Ashdown Equine Therapy Trust, serving veterans, youth, and community riders. Another round of applause burst across the crowd. Then, turning slowly, the Duchess faced Octavia, who had remained off to the side, arms crossed, face tight. And as of today, the Duchess added, Ashdown Hall will no longer be affiliated with Mr. Rupert Chalcot. All sponsorship negotiations tied to his involvement are void. Octavia opened her mouth to speak. The Duchess simply raised a hand. You may submit a public apology later. For now? Step aside. And she did. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but many lingered at the fences, watching Aiden dismount. Some took pictures. Some just stood in quiet awe. A few children ran up to the rails, pointing and whispering. He made the scary horse happy again. He's not scary anymore. He's magic. Aiden smiled, brushing Ravenheart's shoulder. He always was. Mr. Llewellyn walked up beside him. That horse. He wasn't just broken, was he? No, Aiden replied, looking up at the sky. He was betrayed. And now? Aiden turned back to the horse. Ravenheart stood peacefully, eyes half closed in the sun, chest rising and falling with calm rhythm. Now he's free. The old stable wing no longer smelled of rust and mildew. It smelled of fresh timber, linseed oil, hay warmed by sunlight, and the soft knickers of horses whose days were no longer spent under tension but under care. What had once been a forgotten outbuilding was now the heart of something new. Ashdown Equine Trust, officially launched 3 weeks after Ravenheart's final ride. Aiden stood in the doorway of the refurbished barn, arms crossed over a grey sweater dusted with sawdust and horsehair. Behind him, Ravenheart stood loose in his paddock, not tethered, not caged. Just watching. And beside Aiden, a small girl with cerebral palsy leaned forward in her adapted saddle. The pony beneath her was named Lily, rescued from an abandoned lot in Gloucestershire. Now brushed to a golden shine and trained for therapy riding, she stood calmly as the girl smiled and raised one hand shakily toward the sky. I did it, she whispered. Aiden looked up, nodded once. Yes. You did. The girl's parents were crying just a few feet away, trying to hide it with clumsy laughter. Aiden helped the girl down gently, passed her to her waiting mother, then patted Lily's neck with practiced affection. He wasn't used to praise, didn't seek it, but this moment. This was the reason he'd fought. Not for recognition. But for access. For healing. For second chances. In the months following the evaluation, the story of Ravenheart and Aiden spread far beyond the Cotswolds. Horse forums picked it up first, followed by local news, then equine welfare blogs. Then came the BBC feature, filmed across 3 days, including interviews with Priya, Mr. Llewellyn, and, briefly, the Duchess herself. Aiden hated every second of the attention. But he showed up anyway. Because every time the camera rolled, someone new would reach out, a veteran from Leeds battling PTSD, a father in Bristol with a nonverbal autistic son, a former show rider recovering from a spinal injury, asking, hoping, begging for something different than what the system had offered them so far. Aiden told them all the same thing. We work at the horse's pace. And yours. Priya became the Trust's veterinary director, visiting weekly and training junior vet techs in equine-assisted therapy protocols. Mr. Llewellyn, despite grumbling about retirement paperwork, showed up every day to train a small cohort of new stable hands. You're not just cleaning stalls, he'd bark. You're managing souls. Rupert Chalcot, for his part, vanished from the circuit. Officially, he claimed a hiatus. Unofficially, sponsors had pulled out, and 3 past horses tied to his programs were quietly rehomed. The Federation opened an inquiry, still ongoing, but the damage to his public image had already been done. And Lady Octavia? She disappeared from public view for nearly 2 months. Until one day, a letter arrived at the Trust's office. It was typed. Formal. Brief. As part of my ongoing commitment to the estate's legacy, I will personally match the Duchess's annual contribution to the Ashdown Equine Trust for the next 5 years. Unrestricted use. No press. At the bottom, her signature. No apology. But it wasn't nothing. Aiden folded the letter and slid it into a drawer without comment. Some wounds didn't need words to close. One grey morning in late autumn, Aiden stood alone in Ravenheart's paddock. The leaves had turned a violet gold, scattered across the earth like embers from the past. The horse approached slowly, nudging his shoulder. "You know this was your doing," Aiden whispered, running a hand down his neck. "I was just the one who listened." Ravenheart let out a soft snort and blinked slowly. Behind them, a new group of visitors arrived, parents and children, riders and volunteers, all gathered under the modest wooden archway now engraved with the words, "Ashdown Equine Trust, where healing begins with listening." Maya, clipboard in hand, waved at Aiden from the porch of the small office. "We're booked full for November," she called out. "And we've got 2 new therapy ponies coming next week. Also, someone left muffins." He raised an eyebrow. "Blueberry?" he asked. "Pumpkin spice?" He winced. "Might be worth losing a tooth for." She laughed and turned to greet the incoming visitors. As Aiden stepped back into the barn, he noticed something new on the wall, hung quietly above the tack hooks. A black and white photo in a simple frame. It showed Ravenheart on the day of his final ride. Head high. Eyes soft. Ears forward. And Aiden, seated in the saddle, no reins, no ropes, just trust. Below the image was a quote, engraved on a brass plaque. "When you heal a horse, you heal more than the animal. You heal the silence. You heal the people who were never allowed to speak." He didn't remember saying it. But somehow, it felt true. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Aiden stayed behind after everyone else had gone. He walked the fence line with Ravenheart pacing beside him, both of them moving slow, steady, in rhythm with the land. The scars hadn't vanished. But they had changed. Where once there was pain, now there was partnership. Where once there was fear, now there was freedom. And where once there was silence, now there was voice.